Hello everyone, welcome to episode 3 of the Corona Chronicles. You just heard Daniel Galitsky and I record a tribute to Django Reinhardt and Stefan Grappelli. And this was from their time in Italy, which we call the Rome Sessions. That would be the end of the 1940s. And the song is sometimes called Tchaikovsky's Starry Night, and it's based on a standard called Story of a Starry Night. And sometimes it's called in French Improvisation sur la symphonie numéro 6 de Tchaïkovsky. So actually that standard, it borrows a theme from a Tchaikovsky symphony, number 6. Really beautiful song. So once again, that was Daniel Garlitsky on violin. And if you haven't watched the previous episodes, please do so. We're stuck here in Taipei while the world is going through what it's going because of the coronavirus. And these are, of course, difficult times for musicians. And if you appreciate what we do, you might consider taking Skype lessons with Daniel, for example. Daniel is a former professor at the Paris Conservatory, comes from a family of highly trained violinists, and he recently switched over to jazz. So if you want violin lessons in jazz or just violin lessons in general, he's the guy to talk to. And I'll include the links somewhere below in the description. If you like what I do, then please like, subscribe, click the bell notification, share, leave a comment, all that stuff. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm. So the more people are kind of interacting with my videos, the more it convinces the YouTube algorithm to somehow promote my videos. At the moment, I don't have so much time to give Skype lessons or things like that. Occasionally I do. If you're interested, you can reach out to me as well, but we'll see. But if you do want to support me, then you can consider buying something from my DC Music School. You'll find the link as well. Or if you're a beginner gypsy jazz player, I've produced beginner gypsy jazz lessons. Once again, links in the description. So in this video, I want to talk about ear training and transcribing. And I know some of you are very anal about this. Transcribing the actual definition means to hear something and then to write it down. But as far as musicians are concerned these days, when we say transcribing, it doesn't necessarily mean writing it down. It just means figuring stuff out by ear. And whether you write it or not, it doesn't matter. So that's the definition that I'm using in this video. It's more convenient to say transcribing than figuring out by ear or lifting by ear, that kind of stuff. So transcribing it is, and that's the word that people use nowadays, whether you like it or not. As I said earlier, this recording that Daniel and I made is based on a recording from the Rome sessions on this Tchaikovsky Starry Night. And I wouldn't say it's a note-for-note cover, because I didn't spend much time learning it, the chords and the solo. I learned it a long time ago, actually. It was one of my first solos. But my goal here is to show you certain concepts that Django used. I was more concerned with getting the general feeling right. I hope I got it right. That's up to you to judge. And in particular, this solo is actually hard to recreate 100% exactly the way Django did, because in his solo, his timing is very, very floaty. And I did what a lot of players do, is I took the ideas, the same solo really, and when I could, I made them less floaty, so I quantized them to the beat when I could, and when I felt it would sound good to do so. And you can hear players like Stockler Rosenberg do the same thing on a recording called Où es-tu mon amour, which is something that he recorded on his debut album Seresta, and it's actually a Django solo that he transcribed and recorded note for note. But in that same recording, Django's timing was very, very floaty on purpose, but Stockler quantized it. On top of the solo, I also figured out, as much as I could anyway, the chords that Django used behind Stéphane Grappelli. It might not be 100% exact because of the recording quality, and also because of all the instruments interacting with each other, kind of making things a little bit ambiguous. But I was able to get certain details, and even if I'm not 100% correct, I think I'm very, very close. And I use these concepts not 100% exactly the way Django might have done them, but in the ballpark. So here, when we're talking about transcribing, we're talking from the perspective of a student of improvisation. We want to transcribe so that we can absorb the material in, I guess, what's the word? Assimilate the concepts into our own playing. So the first thing that I would do is get familiar with the harmony of the song. If you can do this by ear, then that's really the best way, because you have this internal connection with the music, and you learn to feel it, so to speak. However, if you cannot do this, then I would recommend you ask a friend who might be able to help you out, or more than one friend, someone that you trust. And even if that doesn't work, then at which point, okay, then you can try to find a chart somewhere, if there is even a chart for this song. But there's something to be said about charts. If you've watched any of my previous videos where I talk about these things, like learning, I think there's a video I made called Learning Jazz Standards Like a Champ or something like that. I highly recommend you watch that one. You'll hear my argument against using charts. It's because they may or may not be useful. Charts are only one person's interpretation of the harmonies of a song. And if you study jazz standards the way I did, and many players have, you'll notice that there's more than one way to harmonize a song. Sometimes the differences are negligible that it doesn't really matter. That's open to debate as well. But sometimes the differences are so big that it's completely changed the character, and to play those two versions side by side together wouldn't work. One example of a tune that can be harmonized in a number of different ways is an old standard called I'm Confessing That I Love You. I think the original version just stays on G. I'm confessing that I love you. Da, 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 da. Da, 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 da. Okay, and there's another version that goes da, 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 da. See, G, D augmented. There's another version goes da, 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 da. So one bar instead of half a bar. There's yet another version. Da, 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 da. completely different harmony. This one, the other versions, the differences might be not so important, but this one, F sharp 7, is quite different from D augmented. And then furthermore, like later on, it goes da 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 D E7, da 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 D, C minor to D7. That's the version that I like. So all these subtle harmonic differences can be very important when you're studying a solo, a solo from a recording. Then you want to know as much as possible what the harmonies are in that particular recording. It could very well be different from the one on a chart or that someone knows. So how do you get good at hearing harmonies? And that's kind of like the big question, isn't it? To be perfectly honest, that was one of my major weaknesses when I was a teenager, when I was much younger. Hearing notes, single lines, or even double stops generally wasn't so difficult for me. I could do it. I do it very fast now. I don't remember how fast I did it back then, but I remember hearing chords, even basic chords, it was a little bit difficult for me. And how did I solve this issue? In my case, I solved it by accident. I didn't deliberately set out to fix this issue. It was an important issue to fix, but I didn't have a concrete plan to do it. But what I did was I learned a whole bunch of songs. I learned a whole bunch of songs by heart, and I played them to death. I would play them at jam sessions, play along to recordings. I remember doing a lot of rhythm guitar along to recordings. I remember spending quite a lot of time doing this for months. And so how did I learn these tunes though? Well, I had friends who showed me the chords. I used to take rhythm guitar lessons with this guy from Paris, and he would teach me all the songs he knew with the voicings that he used. And sometimes I would actually use charts as well as a starting point, but I wouldn't rely on them for very long. I would commit them to memory as soon as I could. After learning a certain number of songs, let's say 30 or 40, don't quote me on these numbers, but like 30, 40, by the time you've learned 30 or 40 songs by heart and you can play them fairly easily, then your brain or your ears start to notice, first of all, patterns, common patterns like 2-5-1, things like that, but also automatically your ears get accustomed to the sounds of these patterns, so that when you hear them on other recordings, you recognize, oh, that's, for example, the B section of a song called Coquette is exactly the same as the B section of Honeysuckle Rose, but in different keys. You have songs like Autumn Leaves and All the Things You Are that have similar chord progressions, same as Fly Me to the Moon, and all in different keys. So you get used to hearing chord progressions, and it's nothing theoretical. It's just you have this feeling. Just like when I can see this microphone, it's black. I just see it and I know it's black. And it's the same thing. You hear a chord progression and you just know it's that, whether you have a name for it or not. The more tunes you learn, the more your ears become accustomed to this way of learning, and it gets easier and easier and easier. Of course, there are other tricks too. If you want to learn by ear, you can also try to listen to what the bass line is doing. So that's dealing with single notes, and then you can make theoretical guesses about what the chord quality may be, assuming the bass player is any good and that the bass player is playing root notes, or that you can intelligently guess if it's an inversion or not. There are probably lots of tricks that can help you. You can also study the solo to see if it might even relate, how it relates to the bass line, stuff like that. But really, I can't recommend enough the idea of just learning tunes. Lots and lots of tunes. Learn them by heart. Commit them to memory. Furthermore, learning songs in the context of a genre, of a style of music. In this case, we're dealing with early jazz. Well, not even early bebop, 30s, 20s, 40s. It's fairly codified, so the chord progressions are very, very common. And so you get to become familiar with the code of a style. And that's why when I'm learning a new song, even if I look at a chart, I can tell, all right, what each chord represents in relation to the harmony. Like, for example, on a song called Cherokee, it goes B flat, the way it's written often on a chart now, B flat, then goes to F minor 7, to B flat 7, to E flat, to A flat 7. So this A flat 7, what is it? Well, because I learned tons and tons and tons of songs, I know that this A flat 7 was originally an E flat minor. So this harmony lesson is a topic of its own, something I will address eventually. But yeah, because my experience of learning tons of songs, I know that this A flat 7 was originally an E flat minor. And I knew this before I even listened to the original version of Cherokee, and I was right. The original version of Cherokee goes from E flat major to E flat minor. This A flat 7 is what we call flat 7/7. That's the official name, but it's a substitution for 4 minor. So I'm so familiar with bebop harmony and early jazz harmony that I know what the function of every chord is for the most part. So this first step is very important for me. And one thing you have to remember is that back in the day, in the 30s, 20s, 30s, 40s, they didn't have like the real book. And that's important to note because in those days when people made recordings of what we call jazz standards, they often harmonized it in the way they felt was the most interesting way to harmonize. So you have completely different versions of the same song. Even Fats Waller, who composed Honeysuckle Rose, when he recorded this tune, he recorded it a few different times and he changed the harmonies in subtle ways, but enough that it was a change. So this made every recording a little more unique. Whereas today, when we rely so much on the book, we all play the same way. So that's why it's important to do your own work, to listen to the recording. And the truth is out there if you just open your ears. I think this is very important to say because even today, many professional jazz musicians don't know this. And even people who teach at prestigious music schools, they don't know this information. And I'm speaking the truth because if you just go and listen to the recordings, you know that I'm right. So this information comes in very handy then when you're analyzing the melody, but more importantly, analyzing the solo to see how they relate to the harmony. Let's, for example, take the example of I'm Confessing That I Love You. If a student of jazz is transcribing a particular recording where the chord progression goes G to F sharp 7, as I mentioned earlier, but the student is assuming that the chord progression goes G to D augmented, then the student will be a little bit confused by the soloing because they're wondering, wait, how does F sharp 7 relate to D augmented? So things like that are important to understand, so that when you're figuring out the music, figure out the harmonies first, and then you see, the band is not doing G to D augmented, they're doing G to F sharp 7, and suddenly the line that goes over F sharp 7 makes more sense. So these are things to look out for. So this recording of the Tchaikovsky Symphony, Starry Night, is interesting because the band, the rhythm section, is playing a little bit on ambiguities of the harmony. What do I mean by this? So most of you who have basic experience with jazz probably know what a 2-5-1 is. In the key of G, that would be A minor, D7, G. In this recording, at least in the A sections, whenever there was a 2-5-1, the bass player and Django were playing A minor, a flat 7 to G. The bass line does, as opposed to A minor, D7, G. And this A flat 7 is a substitute. We call this tritone substitute of the D7 chord. It's a standard jazz trick. You can look it up on Wikipedia. Or if you do like I did, learn a bunch of tunes, you're going to become familiar with this sound as well. So yes, for the most part, well, every single time actually, when there's a 2-5-1, they did A minor to A flat to G. There were things like that. The piano, unfortunately, is very, very subtle in the mix, so it's very hard to hear what he was doing. But definitely Django, when he was accompanying Grappelli, and the bass player as well, he was definitely doing the A minor, A flat 7 to G. Furthermore, so the original chord progression is just G, A minor, A flat 7, G. But then Django would also sometimes, quite often, add passing chords. So this is not a big deal. This is a very common passing chord trick. But then he would, before going to the A minor, he would also add E minor to A minor. So this is very interesting to see how Django would force new harmonies onto the existing ones, which is actually just plain G. He add all these chords. The B section, it goes E7 with a flat 9. So if you want B diminished, it doesn't matter what you call it, to A minor. Then C minor to G. So this C minor is what we call 4 minor in harmony. It's very common in old jazz and also in classical music. The 4 minor often wants to resolve back to G, to 1. Just the same way as a 5 chord, also 5 chord being D7, likes to go back to 1. And early jazz musicians loved this device, where over a 5-7, D7, they would play C minor over it, superimposing harmonies. Louis Armstrong loved to do this, and then Django probably got it from Louis Armstrong and did it himself. So the reverse is then true. Like over the C minor, there was one point I think Django did a chord like this. So it's an A diminished, it's a D7 with a flat 9. And the difference between D7 with a flat 9 and C minor is just a difference in one note, really. The G becomes F sharp, so it's not a big deal. A lot of common tones otherwise. So hearing stuff like that is very interesting. At the very end, he also does this very cool chord trick. And it's all voice leading. So it goes G major 7 to G7, then to C major 7, to C minor, to G over B, B flat diminished, A minor to A flat 7, then G major 7. And how do I know how to label these chords? Again, it's what I said. I learned so many songs that I recognize chord progressions. I hear them, I feel them naturally. And it didn't take me long to transcribe this solo at all, even the chords. It was very, very, very quick. I probably spent half an hour learning everything, and probably even less, and then I practiced a little bit to get it right. I'm not saying this to show off, but just to let you know that because I adopted this lifestyle of practicing this way, it gets easier and easier and easier. And I'm stressing this point because I want to remind you that this was one of my biggest weaknesses when I was a kid. I was very ashamed of it, actually. I kind of tried to hide it. But then one day, I faced reality, and I lived a life. Furthermore, some of you who are afraid of harmony or theory, remember one thing, that Django was musically illiterate. He had no names, no labels for any of these things. He only listened to a lot of, he did what I did, learn a bunch of tunes, and he just absorbed the sounds. And he's doing all these complicated harmonic devices by intuition, just because he can hear them and feel them. So then, okay, we've got the harmony settled, and then we can start to study how the melody relates to the harmony. So, da 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 da. So that's what I would do. I'd play the chords and sing the melody and see when the harmony changes and on which melody note. So da 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 na 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 D da da. So that D natural over A flat is like, I guess, sharp 11, whatever. Da da. Then the B section D. That's the 7. See, like, I discovered these new voices by putting the basic harmony and then playing the melody. So that's what I do with the melody. That's what I do with every melody that I learn, or even every solo. I try to I play them on the guitar or whatever instrument that I might be playing, and try to put like another note below it so I can see how it relates to the harmony. So I do this with a melody before I even do this with a solo. And this is how I get really, really familiar with the harmony. Again, not in theoretical terms, but as a feeling. I feel these things. I play with feel. And if you have time, I would even suggest you check out the original version of this, where this melody came from, the Tchaikovsky Symphony, and check out the harmony. It's something different. Da, dee, 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 da, da, dee, da, da. Very beautiful. G diminished. Dee, dee, dee. This is what we call common tone diminished, and The composer Chopin was very, very fond of this harmonic device. Anyway, that's that. The last B section, again, well, if you want to call the C section. So the C section goes E7 again to A minor, C minor to G. Then the bass player plays an E flat, and the melody has the note B. So this, in harmony, we call this a flat 6 dominant. And the note B natural is very peculiar. Let's just ignore that note for now. Let's just call it E flat. So this is a flat 6 dominant. It's a sound that occurs as well in songs like Nuage or Stomping at Decca. But with the note B natural, it's playing a little bit on certain ambiguities. It's coming kind of like from the whole tone scale. And it can also be seen as an A7 augmented. So yeah, that's a very strange harmony. But what you can play over the flat 6 dominant, you could potentially play over the 2 dominant. If all this theory is too complicated for you, just bear with me or take lessons with me or wait for me to make a course on harmony, because I could spend hours talking about harmonic functions. But anyway, these two chords, whether you call it flat 6 dominant or an A7 2 dominant, share the same function. I was having that discussion with Daniel earlier because he was thinking more in terms of A, but the bass player is putting the E flat bass. In fact, for me, the names don't matter. It's something that I feel. It's the same with Daniel. That's why he felt it as an A7. And actually, I felt it as an A7 too, but the bass player is insisting on the note E flat. So it does make it technically an a flat 6 dominant. Anyways, and then the rest is simple. So we sorted that out. We looked at the melody, how it relates to the chords, at least in this recording. Now we look at Django solo. For the most part, Django is what we consider a harmonic player. Django solos are often derived on harmonic concepts, sophisticated harmonic concepts even, especially in the 40s, mid to late 40s until his early death. He started to explore intricate harmonies. And related to the concept of harmony is the concept of voice leading. Voice leading means that when you connect two chords or more, you connect them in as smoothly as possible. So let's say you have a chord like G7 going to C. G7, we're going to play these notes, G, B, F. Now, bad voice leading would be, and you can see this visually, this would be bad voice leading. G7, C. I jumped all the way here, the notes skipped so much. Good voice leading would be this. C. So the G stays the same, common note. The B goes up to C, and the note F goes down to E. And we have a C major, G7, C. And now we add the bass. And you have this jump from G to C, which is very common because the bass lines don't always have to be smooth. They can jump more. But the inner notes usually they move in common tones or stepwise motion when possible. So that's good voice leading. In his solo, Django uses a lot of harmonic devices, but everything is voice led so that it sounds smooth and melodic. That's where the melodic aspect of his soloing comes from. All right, let me break down Django's solo for you. So he starts with this little thing. It's over a G chord. So it's kind of like based on this G shape. Then this little arpeggio. So it's a G major 7 arpeggio with, I guess, enclosures. So G major 7, nothing complicated. It's A minor, da dee da, and then it's actually an E flat minor arpeggio with a few extra funky notes. And he does this over the A flat 7 or D7 if you want to call it. So this is already something very interesting. Over A flat 7 or D7 because they serve the same function. It doesn't matter what you call it. In this recording, okay, they're playing A flat 7, but you can also call it D7 if you want. So Django is playing E flat minor over D7. Actually, I don't know if I said this earlier, but this is one of the first solos that I transcribed of Django's, and I had absolutely no idea what he was doing. No clue, but now I do. So he's playing E flat minor over A flat 7 or D7. How does that work? Well, if you play A flat 9 here, you see that it's very similar to E flat minor. There's E flat minor hidden there. So Django discovered this trick somehow. Again, he knew no theory. But you see, it's all done through voice leading though, from the G major, A minor, then E flat minor. And he does this little tritone to play with that duality of A flat 7 and D. A flat, D. So that's a very cool trick. The next part, the second A, does just a scale actually. This is just a scale, G major scale. Then here, there's a very common jazz trick over a G major. Then A minor. How does it go? Okay, so then voice leading from G major to A minor. So this is A minor here. But then this note E goes down to E flat because it's an anticipation of the A flat. Then goes da da. So it's all related to the harmony of A flat. Then G major again over the G chord. Then over the E7. So it's a harmonic minor scale. How does it go? How does it do it? So you learn over E7, you can play a descending harmonic minor scale. You can try to do it ascending if you want, but in this case, it's a descending. Try to get as many details as you can. Then A minor. So this is a little cool trick. Goes from the root, third, fifth, the ninth. So if you're playing a song like minor swing, over the A minor, D minor. Try to use these ideas. Okay, then the C minor, Django does this thing. So it's a C minor thing. If you want to give it a label, it starts with an arpeggio. Then he does this descending Dorian scale, if you want to call it that. It is what it is. Then he resolves to G, but it's all voice leading. This little bluesy thing. B flat down, go there. So when you have a 4 minor chord, it's something you can play with. G, you can change it. You can do something. G. Feel free to take just the concept rather than the entire lick, and you simplify it as much as possible so that it suits your technical level. Like let's say if C minor, G, something simple like that. It's not even technical, it's using the same concept. Okay, the next part over the A7, well actually the bass player is doing E, A, so it's kind of implying E minor, A7, E minor, A7. If you watch some of my harmony videos, you know that E minor and A7 are actually the same chord. I'm not gonna spend time discussing this right now. You can watch some of my old videos or wait for me to make that harmony course. But Django is thinking E minor over this. And you'll notice that E minor kind of looks like G major. So G major and E minor share a lot of common tones, and in this case G major over E minor is what we call E minor 7. Hear this note? It's still over the A7, which is kind of a funky note to play G sharp, but it's in anticipation of the next chord. It's a voice leading trick from E minor, so E minor, well, A7. See, voice leading. And then over the D7, in this case the bass player is actually playing D7 and Django is doing the A flat 7 over it. Okay, that's why I say it doesn't matter if you want to call it A flat 7 or D7, just call it the 5 chord. And then the next thing is very interesting. So what Django is doing is just playing a G major scale over a G chord. And then here, now he's thinking B minor. B minor has a lot of common tones with G minor. So if I do it visually, look, G major 7, B minor. If I remove this note, there's B minor in it. So it's B minor over G major. The tonic is a sound that is very common. Django discovered it somehow, and he's thinking B minor. Where does this note come from? He's thinking B flat minor, then A minor. So Django's thinking this. Remember, the bass player is not doing this. He is superimposing these harmonies. And I know this. Remember, when I first transcribed this, I had no idea what was going on. But because I learned tons and tons and tons of songs, I know this pattern from other songs, like Nuit de Saint-Germain-des-Prés, for example, where this device is used in the composition itself. But anyway, yeah, so he's saying B minor, B flat minor to A minor. All this over a chord progression that goes G to A minor to D7. Where else do you see this? I can't give anything but love. I can't give you anything but love. So you can do this. I can't give you anything but love. Try the same idea over I can't give you but love. Or even Coquette. So you can hear Jimmy Rosenberg do this, I think, in one of his recordings, if I'm not mistaken. He does like or maybe it wasn't Cocaine, maybe it was another song. But anyway, I've heard something because I've learned so many songs, I can recognize it by feel instantly. So yeah, that's what Django's doing. So B minor to B flat minor to A minor to A flat 7 to G major. Then the second A does another scale. Does the same thing. So that was just G major scale, focusing on notes that emphasize the G major chord. But then he goes to B minor. So how does it go? Oh yeah. B flat minor, then A minor. Here, he ignores, well, he does B minor, B flat minor to A minor very explicitly, so it's very clear what he's doing here. But then over to A flat 7, he's not outlining A flat 7, he's just thinking D7. Then the next part goes to this. He's thinking D minor, which is the D minor is also considered B minor 7 flat 5, which is the 2 of E7. Then he does another, again, descending harmonic minor scale, resolving to A. And this A minor arpeggio phrase or whatever is very interesting. Very cool. Then you can do it in different positions. So it's an arpeggio, root, 3rd, 5th to 9th, then the 6th to the root. So we're playing like minor blues. Dark Eyes. You can use these ideas. Then over the C minor chord, he has this. Sorry. Nice C minor phrase going to G major. This pattern, this arpeggio, it's a shape that Django loved to use. And it's the shape that, it's the Django's tiger shape, if you know that tune. So Django loved that shape. Okay, and then you have that E flat 7 chord, or some people call it A7. Doesn't matter, he has this little cool thing based on a chord shape. So if you analyze it as A7, then you have this. You have the 3rd, the flat 7, the 9th, and the sharp 11, and the 13. If you analyze it as an E flat 7, you have the flat 7, the 3rd, the sharp 5, and the root. But again, I know these, I know the theory, but really for me it's just a feeling. Just a feeling. So then when you have a song like, let's say, Take the A Train, so you play a solo. Let's say we take some Django ideas. Right, that's the first phrase of the Tchaikovsky Pathetique. And then the next chord in Take the A Train is D7. You can use the same thing. So you have to recognize the functions of the harmony so you can use them in different situations. Okay? And then it's just a scale, G major scale. G major. And then A minor. So A minor 9, D, da, da. There you go. That's Django solo analyzed. I hope I didn't scare you with all these technical terms. I happen to know the theory because it's something I study. I'm just very interested in knowing things in general, not just music, but a lot of things, history, religion, politics, all that stuff. But in this context, though, please believe me when I say that beyond the theory, it's something that I just feel. In fact, I don't think of the labels first. I just feel it, and then I can reproduce it. And then with a little bit of thinking, okay, I have labels for everything. And that's the case for many gypsy musicians, Django for sure, Birel, Legrand, Stoker, Rosemont. All these players don't know much theory, but because they learned by ear, learned a bunch of songs, they just feel it like a language. Watch, I guess, episode 2 of the Corona Chronicles where we talk about learning music as a language, and you'll see what I mean. So when it comes to transcribing, you don't necessarily have to learn the entire solo, because it depends on what your goals are. If you want to recreate the solo note for note, okay, then yeah, you learn the whole solo. But often that's not what I want to do. What I want to do is take the information so that I can incorporate it into my own playing. But this solo was so nice that I decided to do the whole thing. And as I said earlier, just because you want to do the whole thing doesn't mean you have to do it 100% exactly the same. In fact, I've studied a lot of recordings of gypsy jazz players, because in gypsy jazz, for some reason, it's very common to play note for note covers of Django solos. Well, I've studied other people's covers of Django solos, and I noticed that they didn't always play it exactly the same way, and they changed a few things here and there. Like there's a video on YouTube that's viral. It's of a young prodigy, Swan Berger. He's playing Blues Claire, and if you look at his solo, he's playing Django's solo on Blues Claire. He doesn't play it exactly the same way if you actually analyze what he's doing. So you don't have to do it exactly the same. That's the point I want to make. In this version of Starry Nights, I didn't do it exactly the same way because the rhythm is so floaty. I changed it ever so slightly. But if you hear it, you probably wouldn't be able to tell where I changed certain things. Well, maybe you could, who knows. So when you're transcribing, you can get different things out of it. You can get the time feel, so you can learn to float if you want. You can't create exactly the way Django did, but you can see where he slowed down, where he sped up, and you can also try to quantize to see like how would the phrase sound if it were perfectly locked. You can try to copy that. You can try to copy the sound, the accents, the ornaments, the little glissandes, little slides here and there, the vibrato, something you can copy. You can obviously copy the phrases note for note and then try them on different songs. That's when I showed you this thing, right? Well, what was it? No. Then you can use this every time there's a minor chord. You use this concept, or you can just take the general concept rather than the lick. And when you do this, you can learn from anyone, no matter how complicated the music. I remember a few years ago, someone got very, very, very upset with me. Someone I didn't even know, someone on my social media, was so royally pissed off at me for having produced instructional videos with Birelli Legrand. He was so angry with me because he said that no one could learn from Birelli. And that's where you're very, very, very wrong. Anyone can learn from Birelli if you just go for the concepts. So for example, this idea, for example, on the D7, of playing E flat minor over D7 is something that Birelli himself does. And so then, and often he'll make it very, very technical, but you can make it very simple. Let's say A7. So over A7, you can play B flat minor. You don't have to do a crazy arpeggio. You can just take a few notes. So A, I'll just play an A pedal. Make it as simple as that. You can make it even more simple. Something like that. Boom. And there we go. You've taken an idea from Birelli without having necessarily copied his super technical B flat minor idea over A7. So there you have it. That's my approach to transcribing jazz solos. For me, it's all about absorbing the language so that it becomes part of me. And I can do any one of those things, like just copy the time field, copy the phrase note for note, study the voice leading, or study just the harmonic concept. There we go. Now, some of you may have trouble hearing single notes too. And if that's the case, I recommend that you still try, make mistakes, but find someone that you trust and ask them. And some people have done that with me. They've come to me as like, all right, I tried to figure this out by ear. Is this right? It's like, no, this is not right. Here it is. And then practice it, memorize it. Maybe you'll start to hear it. So you can, it's always good to have a mentor. So I hope that was helpful. And I hope that will inspire you to train your ears, to transcribe as much as possible. What should you transcribe? Well, I highly recommend you transcribe what you like. Because what you like, you probably already know. Because you've heard it so many times that it's in your ear. Now you just have to figure it out on your instrument. So that's always my number one recommendation. People have asked me to give lists of recordings, but I'd rather not do that because what I like, you may not like. So do you, and that's how you come up with your own style. Thank you very much.